Welcome back, friends. I hope you all are doing great. What we are discussing today, we are discussing in this video security boundaries. Security boundaries are very important aspect of a secure network design, and it exists in many forms. It may exist in physical form or it may exist in logical form, and there are different ways we can enforce security boundaries. So we will discuss the type of security boundaries, how to exist in network, and the details around it in this video. Yeah, so let's make it interesting and let's start the discussion on the drawing board. There are different ways of looking into the same thing from different perspective. In the CISSP book, the way security boundaries are defined is basically, it's explained as security boundary is the line of intersection between any two areas, subnets, or environments that have different security requirements or needs, right? So if there are two different domains, two different area or network, and they have two different security requirements, then we create a security boundary, or the technology, the device or technique deployed to separate two areas is a security boundary. So if we classify this, we just try to see the way we can put a classification around security boundaries. We can say that broadly, it may exist either in a physical form or in a logical form. By physical form, what I mean is a data center or a facility or any office. So if we design a facility, then we have certain areas, and those areas have different purpose, right? So the purpose actually dictates the security need, right? So you may have an office where you have reception or meeting room, or the users, and the users may be IT users or senior executives or some help desk. So those kind of area in an office are actually designated, and they are separated from each other, either by some wall or by some makeshift arrangement, or some you may say that some curtains in some cases. So that is the kind of physical form security boundary, right? In complex places like data centers, you have a main data center, server racks, then you have loading dock, then we have a secure area where people come and their identity is actually verified. So those kind of things are the security boundaries. It includes the perimeter wall as well. It includes the fences, a place for security guards, right? So all those things, we can classify them as the aspects of physical form which constitute security boundary, right? So if we kind of draw this thing here, that if we have a facility, right, it may have like some segments, segment 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they will have different security controls X, Y, Z, A, right? Now, these security controls, where these security controls will originate from, all the security controls will come from the organization security policy, and it will explain in which secure area what policy should be enforced, right? So this is a physical form. If you think of logical form, this may take again a different classification, and we can think of how we separate an environment. Basically, when we talk of environment based security boundary, we are talking the underlying network or the infrastructure where users data flow, right? So the logical form of security boundary may exist in the form of or from the perspective of users or network zones or um, infrastructure classification. Infrastructure classification means you may have a critical server, you may have a management server, you may have a production server or a proxy server. So those all kind of infrastructure are having different security ratings, basically, right? I will come to that. Or it may have it may be based on the data itself, right? So users, data, and anything in between, which may include network zones and infrastructure, right? To give you a basic example, like a very, very simple example, is thinking of the most vulnerable network, which is internet, right? Now, when you connect to internet or any enterprise connects to internet, right? So let's think of this, let's call this perimeter as a data center, or it may be an office. Now, this data center um, may have a connectivity with internet, right? It may have a connectivity with internet. Now, this internet will get terminated not directly to a server, but there will be a something which we call, let me draw it with a different color. A firewall, basically. And this firewall will have an internal connection, which will be connected to a switch. And this switch will host some physical connections coming from the server, right? Now, what we have done here is basically this firewall is creating a separation. And this part is called low trust. And this part will be high trust. Because we don't know who is coming from the internet. We don't know the users who are coming from the internet, what security policies they subscribe to. So those kind of traffic we keep at a low trust level, and the things which we manage, we know the security controls on our servers, the patch level, we know what applications are there. So those kind of things are controlled, so we put them in a high trust level. So what we have created here, this dotted line is basically a security boundary, right? Now, this security boundary will fall where it is basically a network zone, or we may call it as an infrastructure classification as well, because this firewall is technically in most of the company is called Internet Edge Device, or IED, or some of the organization says IES, uh, Internet Edge Service, right? Or Internet Edge Firewall. But the generic term is Internet Edge Device, right? It terminates Internet there. So here you see that how a security zone is created, which is basically a network zone. And this classification is a logical classification. This logical classification is realized with a physical device, which creates two different zones. Basically, the network ports which are there on this firewall, one is outside port and one is inside port. So the outside port will create a network zone, which is low trust, and inside port will create a network zone, which is high trust. And when I say network zone, sometimes I will say security zone. So they are actually interchangeable. So this is also called security zone. Right? So they are kind of same thing, network zone and security zone. Just a different name for that. Now, based on this security boundary, the way we actually define the flow of people in the physical facility, that we can't allow a user directly to go into the data center rack. He has to first come to the reception area. Let's call this X is the reception area, where he will come here first, and then there will be a security check, and then he will go to a zone 2, and from zone 2 he will go to zone 3, where the racks are there. Zone 2 may be an intermediate place where he will put his devices and other things safe and secure. There will be a locker, and then he will enter into the data center. The same way we manage the physical aspect, we manage the logical aspect as well. So when we create the security zones or network zone in a firewall, we create a trust level between those zones, and we create a data flow policy for that, right? So the data flow policy may be, it's not something which is hard coded. We can always tune this thing, that anything which is originating from low trust zone to high trust zone, right, is not allowed by default. We may put that policy, and we allow a low trust zone to come into a high trust zone based on IP address restriction, right? Or based on some TCP or UDP port restriction. So now this restriction is done on top of the network boundary, or the logical boundary, or logical security separation which we have created, right? So this is something which you should have in mind when we talk of logical security boundary. So this is one example, right? Now, most of the network, today, they are actually evolving, and this classification boundary is getting blurred. So nowadays you will be hearing these sentences like the natural replacement of the network security parameter, which I explained here, is in a complex modern enterprise, is the authentication and authorization control, or the identity layer itself is taking a form of a logical security boundary, right? So you no longer rely on the IP data, IP traffic to be controlled on a firewall layer, but you use identity and access management itself to create the authorization mechanism as a layer for security boundary. There we will talk here, about users. So classifying user also creates a security boundary, right? If you have a type of user which is just a visitor, you won't allow that visitor the same access that will be given to a regular employee of the company. And again, the regular employee of the company may be of different type. They may be senior executive, they may be IT administrator, or they may be receptionist, or some super user to manage some critical system. So those user classification created somewhere in an identity and access management system is also a logical form of a security boundary, right? Now, the infrastructure classification is also a classification which is actually which we create. The classification basically is created based on the based on the based on the asset classification or data classification. The infrastructure is classified as a critical infrastructure, not critical C1, C2 level. So those kind of thing will also create a logical form of a boundary, and this logical form of boundary will be based on the access rights, uh, the relationship between subject and object, and what this relationship actually originates in terms of what a user can access, or what a user is allowed to perform some action. So those kind of things come into the infrastructure classification. Now coming to the data is also protected in layers. So when we will discuss Biba model or Bell LaPadula or Clark Wilson model later, when we discuss uh, those kind of things will come into the in domain 2, I think. There you will see that when a data is classified, the data itself is placed on a hierarchy, and those hierarchies have access rules, either discretionary or with some labels, which will create a form of logical boundary around the data, right? So that's also a logical form of security boundary. Now, to understand this in a bit more detail, I'm going to take an example of a typical network. And in that typical network, I will explain how these different logical form of security boundary exist. I think it's good to create a new video here because the length of the video is too much. In this video, we have discussed what is a security boundary, what is the logical form of security boundary, and what is the physical form of security boundary, and this basic example of logical separation between two networks, which gives rise to a security zone, and this security zone is a type of logical form of security boundary. So I hope this video is useful and it has been informative for you. Let's meet in the next video.